which is something I nearly forgot. It is recorded and it will be sent to you via email to all of those that have registered, a link to our YouTube page where you can find all other previous videos, as well as a link in terms of downloading this video on Zoom. Okay, over to you, Mazvita, and welcome. Thank you very much for agreeing to facilitate.
Thank you so much, Asipe. Good afternoon to everyone. Excuse me. Yeah, thank you so much for a warm welcome and yeah, for this opportunity just to share my experiences so far. Yeah, I'm not going to be doing the video thing, you know, as you have heard from Asipe, I just submitted my test. So I'm still a mess. My face is still a mess and all that. So I'm still trying to hide until I have recovered. Yes. So I'll be sharing with you my experiences of collecting qualitative data because that's what I did during my PhD. I was interviewing students from the Engaged Citizen program where I collected my data. I was finding out the experiences of using English as a medium of instruction if their home language is not English. The experience of learning in English and the experiences of learning in community engagement or taking part in community engagement activities where they're not expected to use English all the time. So they're just coming up with the differences in terms of how, you know, learning becomes easy in a community engagement environment rather than in a formal academic space where they have to use English all the time. So yeah, that's just a summary of what my study was about. So I'm sure many of us here have already, you know, started on the PhD, on the research. You have an idea or you already know what kind of method you're going to use to collect your data, whether it's going to be quantitative or qualitative. So it's something that you already know by the beginning of your research. So I'm just going to go through a few slides that I have here. I hadn't prepared a lot because I thought we were going to be, you know, be two of us here and then just share. But unfortunately, I'll just share what I have with you from my end. So I started by, you know, just defining what qualitative data is. So my main aim for this presentation is just to answer the what is, how do you do qualitative data, and the why, you know. So those are some of the things that I just looked at, you know. I didn't get into much detail, but it's just maybe to open your mind to create that space where you can just start thinking about your ideas or developing more your ideas of how you're going to collect your data, right? So what is qualitative data? So it is the data that is used to understand experiences or insights from an informant or a participant's point of view or perspective. So from my end, I was collecting data from these students who are involved in the Engaged Citizen program, trying to understand the experiences of learning in English and the experiences of being in a community engagement space. So it's again, we say that qualitative data is not numeric. It uses descriptions, but can be analyzed quantitatively. By this, we're saying that you can just determine the number of people who have actually raised or who are actually confirming the same pattern of doing things or the same experience. So that's how you can analyze it quantitatively, right? So that's the what is part of qualitative data. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why you need, why is it important to, why is qualitative data important? Firstly, it provides transferable insights about complex phenomena. Again, drawing from my research, this issue of learning in a language that is not one's home language, we often talk about it, or people often talk about it and say, oh, okay, fine, if a student is not doing well in class or they're not performing well, probably it's often at times that people just say the students are not motivated, or these students are not putting effort. But as you get to talk to the students who are involved in this, let's say situation, or in these programs, they begin to tell you the stories, the experiences of learning in a language that is not their own. You begin to understand that it's just not the student being lazy. It's not about the student being not motivated, but a host of other issues that come into play. We're looking at the social beings, the cultural beings, all that, the identity, everything comes into play when it comes to learning in a language that is not one's home language. So that is what I found out, or what I was trying to, investigate from my study, right? And then it also looks at the how and the why of human decision making. So when you hear from the stories of people, or when you have done qualitative, you've collected your data qualitatively, you begin to understand why people act in certain ways, or why people behave in certain ways, why people have decided to do some things based on what they have told you, right? And then why is it important? It is important because the data can be used to develop concepts and theories that help in understanding the social phenomena. So what I was at the end, at the conclusion of my thesis, after analyzing the data, is like, how then do we help, how then do we support students who are facing challenges of learning in a language that is not their home language? So it helps you, once you have collected the data, you now have an understanding of, oh, okay, this is what is going on when students are learning in a language that is not their own. How do we support students? How do we then, from what they're saying, that they're taking part in community engagement activities, what can we draw from those activities, or what is being done in the community engagement space that we can actually employ or use in the formal academic spaces, so that we make the learning space flexible and comfortable, and encourage students to engage more, right? So that is the why part of collecting the qualitative data. And then I'm going to talk, give you the types of qualitative data methodologies that are available. So it's the choice of which you use is entirely up to you when you have decided, or you look at your research questions and you see which one best gives you the evidence, or which one is going to give you the data that you need. So there is the narrative methodology. This one explores the life of an individual and tells their story. Then the phenomenology, there's also the phenomenology, which I used and I am more versed with. It attempts to understand or explain experiences or phenomenal. So as I said that I was looking at the experiences of students in community engagement, how they make use of language in the community engagement space and informal academic space. There's also the grounded theory. This one investigates, the grounded theory investigates the process, action, or interaction with the goal of developing a theory that is grounded in observations. And then there's ethnography, which describes, interprets an ethnic or cultural or social group, right? And then there's also the case study, which examines episodic events in definable framework and develops in-depth analysis of single or multiple cases. So it generally explains the how part. So as I said, these are just types of data, qualitative data methodologies. My focus on methodologies, on phenomenology. So I wouldn't be able to give you like an in-depth description or summary of the other five of the methodologies. Excuse me. Then the next step that I'm going to talk you through is how to the instruments that you can use to collect the data. So these are the data collection instruments. You know, there are different instruments that you can use. The three that are very common, and depending on the lenses that you use, they are usually informed by the lenses that you're using for your study. So the first one, we have focus groups. Usually focus groups are comprised of 5 to 8 participants, and usually the group must attempt to find the how or the what or the why of certain phenomena, right? We also have observations or ethnographic research, which aims at understanding culture, as I explained before, or motivations that may occur. And then the third one, which I used, is interviews. In this, we're saying that conducting one-on-one interviews ensures that one gathers precise data about what people think, or feelings, or motivations. And another advantage of using interviews is that it gives you the opportunity to read body language, and you can have the ability, or you can be able to match it with the responses that have been given to you. So to give you an example, as I was talking to one of the participants on how they felt, or how it was for them to speak in English, or to use English, as a medium of communication, she actually started crying. And then she says, you know what, if I try to remember, what I felt when I tried to fit in. She says, she gave an example of her going to a church, and this church was mainly a white, dominated church. So her mom was working at the church. So she used to play outside with the white kids, the little kids there. So she felt sidelined at the end of the day because she could not talk to them in English, in as much as she wanted to play as a little child, in as much as she wanted to engage or take part in the games. She could not do that because she didn't have the language that could enable her to do that. And she says that, thinking about it, it really hurts me because it's not because I was not able to talk. I could talk, I could express myself very well in my language, but just because it was English, and then there was that, divide. And she says that it hurts her to think that, my childhood could be spoiled or could be compromised, by something like language. You want to take part in something, but you cannot because you cannot converse in the language that is being used. So she actually cried. And then I used that, emotion or that kind of body language to relate it to the intensity or the way people feel when they are using a language that is not the home language. It then speaks to the experiences that you're looking for. What kind of experiences do you want to find out, when you're qualitative data collection? So that's the advantage, I can say, of interviews. You get to see how the person, how the body language and what they're saying, speaks to, what you're trying to find out. And the next step is how do we collect qualitative data? Right. In the beginning, you should have research questions that are well defined. You need to be clear and to be precise of what it is that you need to find out from your participants. For me, I had structured my questions in such a way that, they speak to, they tell their stories, but they are guided by the questions that I have given them. So I could ask them about their experiences in community engagement activities. And then they would start talking about their stories, how their involvement, what it means to them, how they have developed as people or as a person was taking part. I could ask them about their experiences of language in formal academic spaces. And then they begin to speak about participation. They could begin to talk about how they have challenges when it comes to accessing information because it's not a language that they use at home. I also structured my questions, asked them about how language affects the relations, how it affects the way they make friends. And then they begin to talk about their identity, who they are, and the kind of people they would relate to. So I looked at in my question, what it is that I wanted to find out, and then I structured my questions in such a way that it guides the participants or the informant to bring out the data that you're looking for, right? So it should be clear if answering the question requires a deductive or inductive approach. By deductive approach, we're saying that it is a process that is associated with scientific investigation. So the researcher studies what other people have done, the existing theories and the phenomenon under study, and then test the hypothesis that emerges from those theories. So this should also be like a guiding step when you're doing your qualitative data collection. Or the inductive approach, you begin by collecting the data that is relevant to the topic of interest. Then the researcher looks at the patterns in the data and develop a theory that explains these patterns. So for me, I was looking at things like identity, things like how language is used is not only a means of communication, but as is also a means of meaning making and all those things. So you begin to look at your data and say, okay, this is what is emerging from my data. So what is it that I want at the end of the day? Is it speaking to the questions, or is the data coming back to speak to your research questions. And then just to finish off on the inductive and the deductive approaches, the inductive aims at developing a theory, while the deductive aims at testing an existing theory. Inductive has specific observations, or it starts from specific observations to broad generalizations, whilst the deductive approach is the opposite. It starts with the broad generalizations to the specific observations. And then how do you conduct, or the steps that you follow when you're now doing your analysis? You have collected your data, it is there, the steps that you follow. And I think there could be differences from one methodology, like the ethnographic, the narrative, the phenomenology, which are not very, I'm not sure if they could be that, big differences, but there's a certain procedure or these steps that you can actually follow when you're not doing your data analysis. So the first thing is for you to prepare and to organize your data, right? Here you're thinking about the purpose of the study, what it is that you need to find out. So you prepare and you organize your data, right? You review and you explore your data. You consider the length of the epistemological framework and you look at your data through these lenses. Step number 3, you create initial codes. Here you're just taking up what seems to be coming up, or yes, and you look at these patterns and insights, how they're related to the purpose and the question, guided by the theoretical framework. Step number 4, you review the codes and combine them into themes. So now you're looking at the codes and you think about the insights you have drawn so far and how this answers your research questions. And then step number 5, you create themes. So you look at step number 4, you go back to step number 4, you combine this into more comprehensive categories. Let me just give you an example of how I, did this using the phenomenology from my own research. Okay. Okay, so for phenomenology, we use the word data explication, simply meaning analysis, right? So the steps that I followed here, the step 1 was to bracket or to use the phenomenological reduction. So in this step, which is similar to the first step that I've given you, here you're looking at your ideas and you're putting them aside, or you're really conscious that these are my own experiences, these are on my own perceptions. They should not influence or taint the way you're going to view your data. So for example, I'm a second English language speaker, and I'm investigating, or I'm trying to find out the experiences of those who learn in the language that is not their home language. Having gone through the same process, the possibility of me trying to say, okay, I have felt this. I have also, gone through this kind of challenge when I was learning. The probability is there. So you need to be conscious all the time that, or to bracket your own perceptions and be really conscious that you're looking at the experiences of your participants and not your participants. Right. So that's step number one in bracketing, right? Is I've given you that I had my own schooling experiences or presuppositions that I had my challenges relating to concept unrelated to my own experiences, challenges of linking content knowledge, all those things, I had to bracket them. So it's the first step that you do when you're using the phenomenological method. Then step two, which is similar to the one that I gave you, the review and to explore your data, is you delineate units of meaning. This simply saying that you're bringing up the parts of the data that communicate sufficient information to provide a piece of meaning to the reader. So you're taking up pieces or parts of your data that speak or that have enough information that can actually bring information or meaning of what it is that you're trying to find out, even if you take that part or that extract out of the rest of the summary or the rest of the content or context. You take it out, it still has the meaning, or it still brings up what you're trying to investigate. And then step three here, I had to do the clustering of units of meaning to form themes, which is the same thing as, coding your data, and you're now bringing up the recurring information or themes or phrases that are recurring. You bring them up and you put them together. And then the fourth step, I had to do a summary of all the interviews, and I just bring up unique themes, the ones that are recurring over and over. Okay, people are talking about identity, people are talking about, the challenges of participating or accessing information. Then I group them and put them into major themes. Yeah, so the next step that I'm going to talk you through when collecting qualitative data is just to be aware of the strength and the limitation of whichever method you're going to use, right? So the strength of qualitative data, firstly, I realized that it is adjusted to get detailed, insightful information on a given subject or a given domain. And then secondly, with qualitative data, if you need to get rich data, you need to, it can allow you to have fewer participants, and this can provide useful and relevant insights, and can be performed in informal environments. In my case, I was working with students, and with students, at times you need to work according to their schedule, according to what they want. So if they say, come to my raise, we'll meet in the foyer, that's it. You go to the foyer because you need the data, you need to speak to them. If they say, come to the front of the library where everyone is passing, you go there. Or if they're willing to come to your office, then it's a bonus. So it's flexible in that way, that it allows you to conduct your interviews in any place, right? And then the limitations, it is time consuming, and it can be costly. Yes, so if you have to really get stories of your participants, they go for hours on end talking through the experiences, and you have to be there sitting, and then they don't finish, you have to come back, depending whether you're traveling to the place or what you need to do in order to continue with the interviews. It can be costly and time consuming in that sense. Excuse me. And then another limitation is that it takes longer verification process to extract compared information. So if you have, like I had about 18 participants, and the interviews were about, they were ranging between 20 to 30 minutes. Then when I transcribed, there was a lot that was just going on there. So you going from one participant's experiences to the next and bringing all those things together, it can be a longer process. And then participants should be carefully chosen, to avoid bias, obviously. So for me, I was concentrating, or I was more interested in those who are doing the engaged citizen program. So it's just not anyone who is taking part in community engagement activities. I understand that the quite, the other departments or other branches or other veins of community engagement activities. So you need to be sure that, this participant that you are interviewing you have done, like, you have checked correctly if they're taking part in the activity that you are interested in order for you to get the information that you're looking for. And then with qualitative data, it is not generalizable. So, you cannot generalize until you have actually spoken to the participants and you have actually have an insight or an inside understanding of how they view, a certain phenomenon. Then lastly, what I would give is take-home message when you're doing qualitative data, or when you're collecting qualitative data, based on my experiences, is that you need to transcribe as soon as you have collected the data. So if it's possible that you have done an interview today and time allows you, transcribe it. For me, it was a bit of a challenge because I had a break in between from the time that I collected the data and then going back and then trying to think, okay, what was happening here? It becomes more, there's a gap that is there that you need to take time to have, that relationship, or I don't know, if to bring yourself in the space where you were collecting the data. So that's what I would, advise anyone who's going to do the qualitative, who's going to use qualitative for data collection, that you need to transcribe as soon as you have the data. And then you mind your positionality as well as a researcher. What are your preconceived ideas? What are your thoughts? How does, your experiences, how can they influence the data that you're going to collect? So you need to be mindful of all the time when you're collecting the data, when you're analyzing it, you need to be always be conscious of your positionality as a researcher. As I said, that me being a second English speaking student, the probability of me trying to bring my own experiences, my own perceptions, the probability was very high. And that's why I was using phenomenology, which allows you, or which, you have to bracket, you always have to think and bracket. Okay, this is my experiences. You write it down if possible. You speak to your supervisor about your positionality, if possible, that this is what I'm feeling. I think that it's going to interfere with the way I'm going to see or analyze the data. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is that it can be messy. Collecting qualitative data can be messy, and this depends on the lens that you have used to inform and analyze the data. And then it is also important to be always consistently articulate the meaning of the findings. You need to be able to do that, to articulate, to explain, to be able to bring up the meaning of the findings. How does it relate to your research questions? Is it still in line with my research questions? So you need to be always be bringing up the meaning of the findings. It's also important to share with others, and then you draw from their advice. So you share your data with other people. This is what I have found out. And then you can hear from what they are going to say or how they view your data. And then you can also be drawing from their advice in the ways you're going to analyze, or you're going to draw conclusions from the data that you have collected. And then lastly, if possible, do the transcribing by yourself. This helps for you to have that, first-hand experience with your data. You need to have that first-hand experience of, okay, all right, so my participant here meant this, my participant here, that's when they used the body language where they were trying to express this part or this point. So it's always important, or if possible, that's why I said if possible, you can do the transcribing by yourself so that you can always have a first-hand experience of your data. Yes, so I think for now, I'm going to end here. Over to you, Asipe.
Wow, thank you so much, Mazvita, for your offering, particularly the sharing of your experience as someone who conducted primary data and as someone who has actually submitted, so it's doable. I think there's a lot of things to take from this workshop. One being that the choice of a research tool to use is quite a complex, necessary, and a vital tool, or we can even refer to it as an organ in one's research. And I also think what's important in this conversation is how you made us understand the key importance of the operational definitions as well as the requirements of each and every tool, while taking into account the why, the how, and the what aspect, to understand which type of research tool or method one will go to in terms of their research. Also, perhaps it is worth saying as well, I've been saying a lot of congratulations to you, but the gist of your study and how it is of high importance in the scholarship of decolonization language, and how we are working around universities existing in communities to share their scholarship or to co-create their scholarship with communities, and in a way that is eradicating power dynamics, and language being one of them. Well, colleagues, there you have it from the incoming doctor. I'll check the comments section for any questions, and also feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. I see that people are really thanking you for your presentation in terms, so Ndombezi is saying, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. And Legini is also saying, thank you, Mazvita. And there's a question, what were key references that you used? So this is one question. And I think whilst waiting for hands as well as more questions, there's one particular question that keeps on playing in my mind, or rather a comment when it comes to primary data collection, that of a phenomena that we don't speak about mainly the administration that goes into the choice of data collection. So for example, when it comes to interviews, there's a lot of issues of the geographical areas of who you are interviewing and where are they, which contributes to that disadvantage of primary data being expensive and time consuming. So I think it's very important because this is something that I'm also struggling with. But the question is on the sequence of questions that one has to ask, particularly in interviews, taking into consideration that a lot of interviews with human subjects requires a lot of emotions, and it is pertaining to complex issues that individuals face, such as in your case of personal experiences of people in terms of language. So is there a particular way or key idea in terms of sequencing questions when doing interviews? So those are the questions for now. I'll look for hands, and then, okay, I'll hand back to you, Mazvita.
Okay, thanks, Asipe. And sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah. All right. So thanks everyone for the wonderful feedback. There's one question. I think Asipe, you helped me to go through these questions. The first one was, what were your key references? I was using one qualitative research by Sharon Miriam and Elizabeth Tisdale, and qualitative research inquiry and research design by John Creswell. So I'm not sure if this is answering your question, because these are the key references that was I was drawing from. Okay, Asipe, what was the second question again?
Okay, it was based on, is there a particular way in terms of a researcher doing the sequencing of questions, especially when it involves critical and complex issues for interviews?
Well, based on my experiences, I wouldn't say that there is like a certain way you, like if you're doing interviews, you simply giving your participant, like I said in the beginning, that you guiding questions, you ask them a question, and usually these questions actually encourage or probe your participants to speak about the experience or what it is that you're trying to find out. So if it's not brought out, or if the participant does not bring it up, then you can just have follow-up questions. For me, I had follow-up questions that I had on the side if I felt that the participant did not really, speak to what I was looking for. Then I would have like a backup of follow-up questions. Yeah, so I wouldn't know, or I wouldn't think that there is a specific way that you're supposed to, structure your questions. With phenomenology, like you allow the participant to talk, to let everything out. So they just, sharing your experiences, and then here and there you're just guiding them, or you're just asking, some leading questions, but you leave it up to the participant once you have given them like a basic question. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, most definitely. Thank you so much. We also have sort of like a comment from the chats in terms of positionality. A comment that states that it is actually quite a difficult thing to navigate the social, historic, and political standing of a researcher, whilst bearing in mind the ethical considerations of it. But in essence, ethics and positionality are very important. And I think it is quite important for us to always remember that the research that we're doing, which gets into being a difficulty when it comes to our positionality, is a research that will contribute to change. So change requires a lot of self-checking, even with the researcher, so that the research is valid. There's another question, Mazvita. How long did your process of data collection take, and how many people did you interview? And then after responding to this question, I'll just look to the other rooms of the people who are joining us today, who are attending Doc Week, just to see if they have any questions on their side. Over to you.
Okay, so how many people did I interview? I interviewed a total of 18 students, because with Phenomenology, it says that you have to have at least between 15 to 25 participants, so that you really get in-depth, data. You need to have rich stories coming up. So if you have like a lot of people, that's gonna take your time, or you're gonna end up rushing through, so that you meet your target of maybe about 50 participants. So I only had 18 participants, and I had enough time to just ask them and then let them talk through the experiences of taking part in community engagement and how they viewed language. How long did it take me? I'm not sure if I'll be able to put a time frame on that one, because I took a break from the time that I collected my data, and then life happened. I was expecting, and then I had to welcome a baby, and then I had to put that aside. And then I started again. I went back I had done like half of the transcribing before I suspended my studies, and then I took, I started from then. So I'm not sure. I hadn't actually, thought of putting a time frame of how much time I spent whilst doing that. But I think it's manageable. I don't know. I wouldn't want to say 3 months or 1 month. I don't know. I wouldn't know because of the break that I took.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. So there's another question where they're asking if you can please repeat the references that you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Yes.
So the first one I said is this one is by Sharon, Miriam, and Elizabeth Tisdale. It was the 4th edition of Qualitative Research, a guide to design and implementation. And then the second one was John Cresswell, Qualitative Inquiry and Research Design, choosing among 5 approaches.
Okay, thank you so much, Mazvita. If possible, please just copy and paste on the chats so that they can get them again in the moment that I am looking for engagement from the other room. Right. Kristen, would you like to come in? Okay, colleagues, as we're waiting for any other engagement, I think, as you were speaking about the time that you took in terms of data collection, I would like to also say that perhaps it also depends on the number and the topic in itself, the research problem in itself, in terms of how much time one takes and the type of method. I think in most cases, the focus on time and numbers can sometimes really oversimplify or lead into an inaccurate understanding of the complex issue that a researcher is trying to research. So in most cases, even though we put on timelines when it comes to when we want to collect our data outside of life happening, we should also understand that putting much pressure in terms of numbers, in terms of how much time we need to take in order to collect this data, it actually impacts on the simplifying or leading into the inaccuracy of the complex issues and therefore affecting the validity of the data collected. So I think that's something that we need to take into consideration when living today. And also I think something that I'm actually learning throughout these discussions and also throughout Doc Week is that many people are actually starting to do primary data collection in PhD level. And I mean, it's because their research required a different type of method. So that means it is okay to ask the questions that you would think they're simple, you're supposed to understand in order for you to be able to finish doing your research on time. There's so many things that actually impact someone's progress. And one of them being not wanting to ask questions because you think, ah, man, I'm supposed to know this, I'm a researcher. Sometimes when you read about things, either on text or on textbooks, it is not the same. So asking the people that have walked the path, your supervisors, your peers, is very important. And I think that's also the reason why the Center for Postgraduate Students is here, in order to support students in terms of each and any questions that they may ask, in terms of how to structure your proposal, in terms of anything else that many people would assume if you're on postgrad level or master's level as a researcher, you're supposed to know. I'm looking at the chats again, and I see from the DocWeek side, they do not have a mic, but they do not have any questions, and they would like to thank you, Mazvita, as well, for taking this time to come here and present. Colleagues, are there any other hands before moving on to Mazvita, just to say her last closing remarks, and then we close the session? Okay, I see Nico. Is saying, what is the type of analysis method did you use, Mazvita? Should I repeat it, Mazvita?
Yes, please.
What is the type of analysis method did you use?
Okay, the analysis method that I used, I'm trying to think. As I said, I used the phenomenological approach, so that it gives you the steps that you follow from collecting your data, from analyzing and collecting and analyzing the data. So there was just a methodological framework that I used for analyzing the data. I'm not sure if I am answering the question correctly.
Okay, thank you so much. There is another question from, let me see quickly, from Fenze, saying, thanks so much for the informative presentation. A question, just a follow-up question, how long data collection takes. Can you talk a little bit about reaching saturation point? What are some of the considerations you need to make around this, e.g., could it be that you need to be asking different questions?
Okay, I'm trying to look for the question and read it again. It's coming from?
It's coming from Fenze. It's a follow-up question in terms of how long did data collection take you? So Fenze is saying, can you talk a little bit about reaching saturation point? And what are some of the considerations you need to make around this?
Okay, so could it be that you need to be asking different questions? Okay. Right. How long did it take me to collect my data? I think that was about in a month. And also given the fact that students were rushing through the exams, so they were not in the mood for follow up conversations or anything. So I actually did that in a month. I had actually interviewed all my 18 participants. And then here you're saying that what are the, okay, can you talk about a little bit about reaching saturation point? Oh, well, I think you get with in-depth interviews, sometimes you get more than you're actually looking for. So there are other things that, I would just sit down with my supervisor and say, oh, okay, this coming up here is worth, really investigating into, but it would need to go back. It would need for me to go back to, changing the way I have structured my questions or the research, the lenses that I'm using. So it would need for me to go back and maybe adjust those things. So if you can do it, or if you're in a mood, let me say that, if you're in a mood to go back and make those changes, you can always do that. But yeah, there's a point that you just say, okay, the data that I have now, I think it's enough to, speak to the research questions that you have. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mazvita, and also to everyone that's here in terms of your engagement. I think also the other question that might have accompanied as well the saturation point is what happens if you're not getting enough data and you've also exceeded the number of people to interview, then what? And I think also this leads into the importance of understanding you are using pilot study in order to understand how feasible your research is and how rich your data will be. I think just before leaving, colleagues, perhaps I can just play 2 videos just to also sum up the conversation that we've had, the beautiful conversation that we've had. And these videos are speaking on interviewing, and the second one will be speaking on questionnaires. Just indicate for me on the chats if you can hear the audio of the video. But just before then, after the videos, we will close the session. I would like to also really thank Mazvita for taking this time to grace us with your presence, and most importantly, for taking your time to share your experience. I know how fatigued you are in terms of the PhD process. I mean, this has been a lifelong project, but you've taken this time to be with us today and to share your experience in terms of primary data collection. So thank you so much for that. And for everyone else who's joining us today, I'll play the videos, and after that, we will close the session. I see people are also thanking you, so you can just read the chats. Let me try and play the videos, colleagues.
To be chatting about a few things that you need to be taken into account if you're using written questionnaires or surveys to collect your data.
The first thing to consider is what information you need to collect. What is your research question? You'll need to have a strong sense of what data you're trying to get to answer your research question. Don't include items on your questionnaire just because you think a questionnaire should have them. Do you need to know your participants' names or ages or genders or salaries or workplaces? What you ask depends on what it is you're trying to find out.
Then you need to think about what medium will be best to use. There's lots of online software for developing quick internet questionnaires. Google Forms, for example, is really easy to use. It's free and it collates your data in visually appealing ways. And there's plenty of YouTube videos showing you how to set up a Google Forms survey.
But using an online form and sending out an online link assumes that your participants have internet and would be comfortable using the method. If your participants don't have online access, then you need to find another process. Maybe you have to post out paper-based questionnaires, but be prepared for very few people to complete them and send them back. It might be that you have to take the paper-based questionnaires to the participants and collect the data yourself.
In which case, you might be better off doing interviews where you can probe and add questions as you go in response to what your interview has said.
But perhaps your research design means you have to ask exactly the same question in the same order to each participant. Then a paper-based questionnaire might be exactly what you need.
And here there's few things you need to consider, like
how long will my participants be willing to spend on the questionnaire? It's no good asking 100 questions if the participants will only be willing to answer 5 or 6.
And it's not good using fancy words that the participants won't understand.
And you need to make sure that the participants have full information and provide their consent for the data to be used at the beginning of the questionnaire.
And you need to be sure to pilot the questionnaire a few times with people similar to your participants because they will no doubt find problems you have missed. It's useful to get your pilots undertaken in front of you using a think aloud protocol. This will often demonstrate where the problems lie.
What ice cream do I like best? Vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry? But I hate ice cream. So what am I meant to take?
And I like caramel ice cream. And that's not an option. Stupid question, right?
Yes, it is. Let's consider other stupid questions people sometimes put in their questionnaires.
The leading question, where the participant is kind of forced to take a particular view or assumption. For example, should consent parents attend their children's sporting events? Yes or no? This suggests that attending sports events is aligned to being caring, and it doesn't leave space for participants to point out why they cannot attend such events. Or this one, how much you think prices will drop? This leads to the assumption that prices will indeed drop. Or, what is the key problem with this policy? This assumes that the participant thinks there are problems with the policy.
And then there's the loaded question. These questions force the participant to respond without being able to contest the basic assumptions. So, for example, where do you go to party? This assumes the person goes out to party.
Double-barreled questions are ones where the poor participant doesn't know which bit they are being expected to answer. It's 2 or 3 questions squashed into one. For example, how satisfied are you with discipline and student support in the school, or are you not satisfied?
Then there's the problem with using absolutes in questions, like always, never, and so on.
Probably the most common error is having questions that don't make complete sense to the participant. They are either ambiguous or vague or uses complicated language. For example, asking students to answer the question, do you feel you have scaffolded support in your acquisition of academic literacy practices?
There's a multiple answer question where 2 or more answers could be right for a participant, but the system only allows them to choose one. For example, do you go to the shops during the week or on the weekend? Maybe I go shopping on both, but the system only allows me to choose one.
There's the insulting question, and this can be difficult because you have to have a sense of what your participant might prefer not to say. For example, some questionnaires make people choose their title from Prof, Doctor, Mr, Miss, and there would be a lot of people who do not use any of these titles.
Then you need to think about the flow of the questionnaire and the base structure that will make sense to the participants. Often, these are only issues that can only be ironed out with lots of piloting.
We hope we've raised a few issues for you to consider as you go ahead and design your questionnaire. You can find some more materials about questionnaire design below this video.
Bye,
and
good luck with your studies.
Okay, colleagues, I'll play the last video. All right.
So I see qualitative interviewing as more like a conversation, but it's an unusual conversation. It's a conversation that is held between two people where the one person tries to take a back seat in the conversation whilst at the same time remaining attentive to the conversation and keeping the conversation going. So it's a very difficult form of interviewing.
I see interviewing as a means by which we gain interest into people's worlds. It provides the researcher the opportunity to enter into people's worlds and understand their experience from their own perspective. One thing that made me fall in love with interviewing was that it offered the opportunity for the researcher to enter into a conversation with your participants.
I think the other thing that's very important for me is that we don't go into a qualitative interview with an interview schedule. I don't like to see people having a series of questions that they want answers to. I think it's fine to have a couple of bottom lines, things that you don't want to leave the room without having had discussed. But that's different to saying that you've got questions and you have to have the answer to the question.
The most important thing for me as somebody who does in-depth interviews is that when I approach an interview, I have one open-ended question that I ask my participants to begin off with.
You must always be prepared to expect the unexpected. By that I mean when I went with my questionnaires, I realized that everything that I had on my questionnaire, when I started to do the interviewing, most of the participants actually brought concepts, which were not in the questionnaire, So I had to kind of adjust to that.
To get at experiences of the phenomenon requires us to engage with the person as a human being and to have a conversation which is unstructured and very difficult to prepare for. So you can't prepare a series of questions in the same way as it would be very weird if your friend asked you out for coffee and you then prepared for the conversation that would unfold.
I was actually happy to find things that I didn't expect because, at the end of the day, that's the whole point.
The other thing I've learned with doing interviews is that you need to be very attentive. You have to be an attentive listener. You need to listen with your mind and you need to listen with your heart. So as they are speaking, I've learned that I shouldn't interrupt them. I should let them speak, and only when they are done talking can I make follow-ups and ask them questions.
Also, I think it's important to let the participant talk rather than constantly interrupting the participant. I found that writing the questions down that come up as the participant is speaking was particularly useful for me.
So what is important about doing this then is that you need to be very attentive, in the sense that you need to be jotting down trigger words from what they're saying, so that you can use them to make follow-on questions and seek clarification and seek further elaboration on what they would have said.
If you ask somebody how they experienced something, they might, for example, tell you that they found it challenging. Now, that is a trigger word for me, because it doesn't really mean anything. It's the kind of thing that people say. It's the kind of thing that just washes over us. It doesn't really tell us anything. We could have 15 different people telling us that something is challenging. We wouldn't really know what the nature of those challenges are, or why that person found it challenging, or why they chose that word, or what that word really means to them.
So I wait for the participants to finish or tell me a story about that particular phenomenon that I am investigating, and then later I ask questions like, so earlier on you talked about emotions when interviewing. Can you tell me how you have felt in that particular situation?
And so one of the things that is quite useful in qualitative interviewing is to listen for those outside voice words, challenging, passionate, and in those moments to follow up and to ask for more information.
Well, there you have it, esteemed researchers. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you again next week, as we will be having a library orientation and training in terms of how to access resources as postgraduates at Rhodes University. Do enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.